about like him like interacting with this guy and wanting to talk to him. It was really cool. Uh, yeah, I just started reading like again this year. I used to love
I think
like
we're
when I
we're
was
going
younger, but
live. And I load up. If you could also record us on Zoom too and get it going.
mhm.
Anybody feel called to get us started now live? I'm live. I don't mind. Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Mumbo Jumbo Community Conversation. I'm Jayru Kadar, one of your hosts, facilitators, moderators, readers, thought leaders. Um, I ran out of words to say for the bar, but it's all good. Thank you all for joining us. So we're back today for, I think this is part four of our systems thinking workshop. We are going over Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And today we're going to be wrapping up this short series, this short book discussion series we've been doing over the past couple of weeks. Going to be getting into some leverage points, some systems traps. It should be a good conversation. So thanks to everybody who's joining us on the live stream and soon to be on the Zoom, I'm sure. Let's get it cracking. We normally start off all of our mumbo jumbos with a check-in, which is if today were a number, what number would it be? If today were a color, what color would it be? And then a special check-in question. Does anybody have any special check-in questions for us to do today? I'm gonna go with what's your favorite fall activity or one you're really looking forward to? As soon as it one day becomes fall and not this like half summer that it is currently in. And I can get us started and lead by example here. So I'm feeling like a wine red. Gonna go with a 9 today. Feeling pretty good right now. And then let's see, a fall activity I'm looking forward to. Probably camping one good time out in the sticks. I love to camp during the fall time because that's where you can really see all the leaves changing, and it's absolutely beautiful outside. And you sip on some hot cocoa and hope a bear doesn't kill you. It's my favorite. I'm past it to two.
What's up, y'all? Feeling like a uranium green 6.5 today. Doing all right, just exhausted. And let me see. I do think I like to skateboard a lot, and I feel like fall is one of the best times to skateboard because you got to layer up a little bit, so you basically get like the most protection you can get without like overheating yourself at the same time. But I also really enjoy going to the apple orchards, and a haunted house or two. Might hit a haunted house or two this year. Those are apple orchards and haunted houses are like two of my more.
The like the scream part a couple years, and it's like always the same. I'm scared.
I've actually the one that I went to most recently actually wasn't here in the city. It was in Ohio, and it was like happening right outside of a Renaissance fair that we also happened to be at. So we did the Renaissance fair, and then we did the haunted house. But
That one just happens to be at a Renaissance fair.
well, to be clear, we were very intentionally at the Renaissance fair. But yeah. But yeah, I'll go ahead and pass it to Alvin. Picked his mic up.
Okay, sure. I'm feeling like an 8 gold and definitely long walks and audiobooks. So I've been doing like a 6 mile on Saturday, Sunday. If I could do it during the week, I'd do that too. Pass to you.
Okay. If I could choose a color to describe my day, I would probably choose red. Just because I've been very stressed all week. If I could choose a number, probably be 5. Feeling kind of, I think I hit that midday slump around like 2. So I'm just ready to go to bed. My favorite fall, I guess, activity. Well, I do this all year round, but I really like pulling out like my old jazz vinyls or maybe even listening to like George Gershwin, and just letting my window kind of open up and having that like cool breeze kind of come in and hear the crackle of the record. I think is
What's some of your favorite jazz?
John Coltrane, trying to think. Donald Byrd. Trying to think of a lot of Herbie Hancock, Ella Fitzgerald, Dinah Washington, of course Billie Holiday. I love her. Hmm. Dang. Trying to think of more. Oh, what's that? Bobby Timmons is very underrated. So is John Clemmer. Y'all should give him a listen. Um,
See, I went over there taking a chair. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I love music. I think the only genre I'm not really into is pop, but I love everything else. Like, yeah, even country. But I like old country.
I always felt like just like the idea of pop as a genre is strange because like if pop is just whatever's popular, like that doesn't really mean anything, you know? So,
Yeah. I feel like it's like its own thing. Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Nas, you want to check in? All righty. Well then let's get it popping, y'all. So the agenda for today, we're gonna get into some systems traps. So, we're all in systems, and I don't know if y'all have noticed, but systems they can fail. So what does it look like when systems fail, and what are some common ways that systems tend to collapse in on themselves? That's number one. And then we're also going to be talking about leverage points. So within every system, there are places where we can act on them and really change how the system works or make it way more effective, way better. So we're going to talk about a couple of those ways that we can do that. If you missed our last session, we had Eric DeLuca from the University of Wisconsin in their food systems uh, department section. I'm not sure what they call those things nowadays, but we had Eric DeLuca on as our special guest, helping us break down what are systems actually made of. So, how do the stocks work in a system? The individual pieces that we can see. How do they flow into one another, and how do they inform each other? So, if my goal is to have energy and I run out, then my system is to go grab some coffee because coffee tends to boost up my energy. Though lately, I think I've been drinking too much coffee, so I have been not getting as much energy boost from that. I got to figure out some different ways to do it. But that's a little bit of the basics of what we went over last time. Was there anything else that y'all want to make sure we cover?
yeah, just the thing that you mentioned about you drinking too much coffee and therefore not giving you mu as much energy, also made me think about we talked about feedback loops last time, which are what's the best way to describe this? Feedback loops are basically uh, a feedback loop happens when a change in whatever supply your system is designed around affects the flow of, new resources in or out of that supply. So the example that you talked about with the coffee, the supply, the stock is your energy. And when your energy drops, you drink coffee to bring more energy into your stock. But the different types of feedback. So that is typically what's called a balancing feedback loop because it is a feedback loop that's designed to keep your energy around a certain level. But the reinforcing feedback loop happens when you drink so much coffee that it's not giving me as much energy anymore. So I'll drink an extra cup, and that'll give me the boost. But then when you go back tomorrow, the extra cup won't give you the boost, so you got to drink a second extra cup. So you're drinking three. And so the reinforcing feedback loop is when the increase or decrease in the stock causes the change in the stock to increase or decrease faster or slower, depending on, which way it changes, if that makes sense. Um, yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody can clarify that a little better if that was.
Spread the book, so we're all good. Alvin, what you had something you wanted to throw in?
Oh, just explosive growth, exponential growth and decline. So, population of cockroaches, if you see one, there are thousands that you haven't seen. And the more cockroaches there are, the more babies they have. The more babies they have, the more cockroaches there are. The more cockroaches are, the more babies they have. And it goes on until you do something about it. But real quick, as our special guest, Cadence, you know what we're talking about with systems thinking? You know what systems thinking is?
I feel honestly, I have no idea. I feel like what you just explained though makes a lot of sense. But honestly, I'm very open to like learning. I don't think I've heard of the book that you guys have read, but I'm interested in hearing more about like what it talked about.
And that's actually a great idea. So, for those of you that haven't been with us, the book that we're talking about right now is Thinking in Systems. You're not going to be able to see that. Thinking in Systems by Donella Meadows. And it's a book that we pass around a lot in our organization because it gives you a very like clear entry level introduction into what's called systems thinking, which is a sort of like a field of study, that's really about understanding how systems work, how the different parts of different systems interact with the different parts of other systems, and how we can, leverage those systems more effectively. So everything that we were just kind of like talking about was really like talking about, like like J. Rue was talking about like the stocks and flows. Those are more like really like the basic building blocks of a system. Like every system is designed to hold something or grow something, and there are different mechanisms for doing that. And then the feedback loops have to do with how systems regulate themselves, or fail to regulate themselves as well. So, I don't know if you have any questions, we're more than happy to answer. But also, if you have any, just like during the discussion, feel free to snatch the mic at Alvin's hand.
Yeah, so it sounds like basically you're talking about how the systems intersect.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Intersect, just
Yeah.
how they behave,
Yeah.
how to understand them better.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, all that.
Interested in hearing more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you will.
Cool. So, the first place that we were going to start off with today was in those systems traps and the particular opportunities that arise from those. So, when we fall into these kind of traps, what can we do to get ourselves out or to resolve some of those issues? And there are a myriad of different examples that she gave for systems traps. So things like policy resistance, people don't like a law or a policy, so we're all gonna move to try and everybody has different goals in a system. So if you try to enact something that not everybody likes or that isn't in everybody's best interest, people who feel like their interests are not being met are going to move to try to get that policy to be changed in a way that does suit them better. You could think of like special interest groups for something like that or lobbyists. It also talks about things like drift to low performance. So if the bar is really high in an organization or a group, typically that bar is going to be really high. Like there's always people who talk about it's the environment that you're in. So if your best friends are entrepreneurs and they're on their grind and they're always talking about their business and how they can do and be better, that means you're going to end up inevitably talking about those same exact things, doing and becoming better. But if that group is, just going to be on their phone all day, is just playing video games all day, no aspirations, no dreams, guess what? You're going to drift down to that low performance with them because there's no foundation for let's keep the bar high, let's keep doing well. And when we get the easy way out, we will take the easy way out and just drip to that low performance. So that's another trap we tend to fall into. Um, there was also things like success to the successful as well. So the saying, the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. We have created a system where if you are winning, you have the tools to continue to win and keep winning. And I'm not sure if y'all have ever played a game of Monopoly, but if somebody has all of the houses on the board in Monopoly, it is very hard, very, very hard to make a
But
comeback.
what if you work really hard?
If you work really, really hard, maybe you can come in second. Maybe. but you have to tear down all the other players in order to do so. So, yeah, that's another example of a systems trap. And there are a couple other ones too, like rule beating. So you can think of, students in a school might cheat because they're just trying to get their degree. They don't really necessarily want to learn. That might not be their goal. And there are loopholes or ways that they can get around the rules in order to achieve that goal of graduation. All they got to do is put the AI prompt in, have ChatGPT generate all the answers they need. Hallelujah, I got my degree. So those are a couple examples of systems traps that we tend to fall into. One that I really wanted to highlight for the purposes of this discussion was the tragedy of the commons. So the tragedy of the commons is essentially if think of like you live in a bay area and you're next to the ocean, everybody is going to act within their best interest. Like imagine you were a fisherman and it's like, oh, shoot, we can just fish in this ocean and get all the food we need. But you and everybody else in the bay who's a fisherman is having that exact same idea of, oh, let's just fish and it'll be fine. And now everybody's fishing and it's great. We can eat. This fish is delicious. I went to San Francisco not too long ago, and if you get fresh fish straight from the ocean, that's a different kind of flavor right there, boy. But anyway, so everybody's fishing, everybody's, collecting and getting the harvest in. And that will keep happening until one fateful day there will be no more fish. And now we're all starving because we used up the stock of fish in this aquatic system we call the ocean. And it's really coming out of the fact that that is exactly to what Chin just
Is it
said.
really possible to fish all the fish?
Shared resource. Yeah, it is possible because it's happening right now. And it's like it is happening right now. Fish populations are down like I think it was like 80% or something like that. That I think that might just be like wildlife population in general is like dwindling very poorly.
We have created so much technology specifically so that we can fish all the fish.
And how does that change the system?
Well, I think to what Jay Rue was just about to say, the idea behind the tragedy of the commons is that it's something that happens to shared resources. That's where that term, the commons, comes in. And when you hear people talk about like a commons, that's what they're really referring to, a shared resource. And it's this idea that, if you don't have some way of maintaining the stock where it is, then eventually that shared resource will be depleted the more and more and more people use it and exploit it, especially if they do so, because back to the fish example, typically fish are a sustainable resource. They reproduce, and if you leave your fish population alone long enough, eventually it will bounce back. But what we have done is we've created crazy nets and sonar and lures and stuff like that that allow us to uh, extract from the fish population faster than it can restore itself. And so eventually, it's like we've talked about, it runs out. And if there are no more fish to reproduce, where are you gonna get your fish from? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the best examples, and then I'd love to hear from some of y'all, maybe some examples from your own life. But I think one of the best examples and the one that came to my mind as I was reading this section was like at Kepro, we live very communally, and that has many consequences, many of which I absolutely despise. But I did want to touch on two that I think were particularly relevant in a discussion on the tragedy of the commons. So one, we recently had our fridge break down because we had too much food in it. We are feeding upwards of like, I'd say we're like serving 10 people or so a day. And that produces a lot of leftovers. And for a long time, we didn't have a very good system. I'd argue we still don't really have that great a system for for balancing that. and maintaining the fridge. So it got to the point where, we would be putting leftovers in the fridge. Nobody's eating the leftovers because other people are cooking or they go out to buy other food or whatever. And we stacked up so much food in the fridge that eventually, and that could be expired, that could be non-expired food, and it probably is more expired food than not. We stacked up so much that I think it covered the vents, if that's right, and it blocked the airflow and completely killed
Critical
the
threshold.
yes, a critical threshold of food in the fridge. And it was reached, and we did not have a fridge for about 3 days. Um, and yeah, it was not fun. So that's one that it made me think of, and it also made me think of one that really hits me close to home, my Wi-Fi connection. We had like 100 or like a gig download speed or something like that. And having 15, 20 people trying to access spreadsheets and watching YouTube. And I'm sure somebody's torrenting a movie illegally somewhere in the house. And I'm trying to give a presentation. The Wi-Fi was ass 85% of the time, except for at night when everybody went home. So that's the only time I could actually use the Wi-Fi. And that's just another example of like, the Wi-Fi is a shared resource that we all have, and it's like great. Let's do it. Everybody has access to it. Everybody can hop on. Everybody knows the password, and everybody it is in their best interest to use the internet. So we all try to use the internet at the same time, and now everybody's internet is running slowly because we all want to be on it at the same time. So yeah, I would just love to hear some other, thoughts, examples of.
Have you experienced any tragedy of the commons in your home?
Say none that I can think of. Um, not always. No, definitely not always. I feel like I don't know. As I've gotten older, though, I've noticed I really don't mind like cleaning. This is just like a personal like thing that I've noticed. I actually like it. It helps with like I don't know. I think also like I like things to be very like orderly. I'm also on the spectrum. So I think it's just that having that kind of like, okay, you know what I mean? I'm making my list. You know what I mean? We're gonna do the dishes. We're gonna do, laundry or whatever. But no, I definitely don't think the dishes always get done. Definitely not.
That would be solved with fridge. That was your house.
Mm, it's like too many people are using that one resource. So maybe like, ugh, I don't know. Maybe like try to get people to eat more foods that don't need to be refrigerated. You know what I mean? Like, takes home, just something more like a snack, like you can get some chips or something like that. But yeah,
Fair next time.
yeah, right. Or just because it seems like there's too much. You know what I mean? There's too much. Let's say I don't know. You go out to eat and a lot of people putting their stuff in it. I don't know, but I would just say maybe you try to do that. You know what I mean? So many things that don't need to be refrigerated. Not necessarily like perishable items, so they won't go bad. But yeah,
No, I think you like when you said there's too many people using that resource, I was like, that is exactly it to
yeah,
like really understand like how to like not fall into that trap
yeah,
because like what it is just that like you have to have some way of like saying like, all right, y'all, this is too much,
yeah,
like and like sometimes it's like a cultural thing, so you find ways to like help people understand on like an instinctual communal level that like I have to do my part to not overload this system so that we don't all lose it. Sometimes it's like a more like hard, like draconian sort of like I'm the fridge guardian
yeah.
and the fridge has reached its limit and I'm not letting anybody else put anything in this fridge until we get it cleared out. Um, but then also, the system will stop you on its own eventually, as we've learned. Yeah, yeah. When it collapses, yeah, the fridge will go out. Yeah, 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 definitely.
Better cooks, no leftovers.
Honestly.
If it wasn't eaten, it wasn't worth eating.
True. I think that truly speaks to just like, for any one of these, and I'll go into if we want, I can get into a different system track. Yeah, so For any like system trap, and there are many, 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 even beyond the ones that we listed, but there's always like multiple different approaches you can take to like solving those traps that each just kind of have, some of their, like, for example, the cultural route tends to be very slow, it tends to be a whole lot of work. But the more like, you know, set a hard rule and strictly enforce it way, tends to be quicker, but you tend to get less buy-in, and that's how you end up with what Jeru was talking about, rule beating and policy resistance and all that. But I was gonna say the another system trap that we had talked about, just like really highlighting today, was escalation. And this is one that I think people are very, very familiar with. Anybody that's been in a bad argument understands escalation. Jeru made a face there. But I think like a very easy way to understand this one is just like, imagine you're in a coffee shop, imagine you're in a library and everybody's whispering, and then out of nowhere, somebody starts talking a little bit louder, well, now I'm at my table and I need to talk a little bit louder so that my people can hear me over this guy, but then I'm getting louder, so the people next to me are going to raise their volume as well, and now none of us can hear our people. So so it kind of creates or it's a reinforcing feedback loop. Escalation is when like one response leads to a bigger reaction of that, and then a bigger reaction of that, and it creates the snowball effect. Um, Let me see if I can think of a more specific example. Oh man. Sometimes uh I like to play video games a lot. And I've got this one friend, Franklin, and he is a beast at fighting games, man. And the way it typically goes is Franklin will come and set the bar very, very high for set the bar for performance very, very high. And that gets everybody's sort of like competitive spirits like going. So what happens is like one person will, they'll win, and then it's like that's the person to beat, and everybody's trying to like go for them. And then like the other person, like once they get beat, then it's like, okay, that's the person to beat, and like, we'll now everybody's trying to go at them. And it's just like every time that sort of like happens, like everybody's getting more riled up until we're just like yelling at each other and screaming at each other over who's better at the game. And it's ridiculous. I think like, that's a fun example, but like I said, arguments, one person says something that's a little underhanded, so the other person responds with something that's a little bit more slick to try to cut a little deeper. And then the first person like shoots back with something that's like, oh, okay, now we're entering a dangerous territory. And then after that, it's just uh carnage. But yeah, I don't know. I would love to, as J. Rue did, I'd love to pass it around for examples escalating.
Um, any examples of escalation? I would say maybe just the same as you. I've had a lot of experiences where I've just tried to have a simple conversation with some people. And I think sometimes they may take what I say you know what I mean, the wrong way. And so they kind of, like you said, like they maybe say something that tries to hurt my feelings or, try to undermine me in some way. So, I definitely think I like what you said. It's kind of like, to get that reaction. Uh, so
One up, like
yeah,
one upping the other
yeah,
person.
and yeah, I was gonna say I think it's just I don't know, like sometimes for me I'm like I didn't mean it like that. You know what I mean? I think it's just more so like how you took it.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I
Yeah.
was like, I don't know. I don't really have nothing else to
No.
say.
Hey, and it's probably just none of us want to air out our dirty laundry.
Right, yeah.
I don't nobody wants to. What's the last horrible fight you got into? It's
I don't
not
want
a
to bring back those
not a
memories.
good
Yeah.
check-in question. Not a good check-in question. Yeah. Yeah.
I think when was the last time you got in a situation that really escalated? Um, I can think of a couple from earlier today. One the escalation piece made me think of was also like protests that people like are in where like there's typically like an inciting incident. Um, or that, but there might be some things like kind of under the current, and some feelings that people already have kind of bubbling under the surface. And then there's like an inciting incident, so you could think like the George Floyd protest or something like that. And people responded to the George Floyd protest with, okay, we got to go out in the streets, we got to make our voices clear, we got to make our voices known. And then there was an escalation of, all right, now maybe people are getting violent. Okay, well, then there are police responding to that with violence, and then people are going to meet that with violence. And it just, goes on and on until there is some destruction there. And typically there's a lot of people end up hurting from that level of escalation from that one original inciting incident and how people choose to respond. And it also made me think of like kind of the volatility of social media and how because people are like able to be anonymous, I think there's a lot of extra escalation in those scenarios and like people really want to come off as like top dog. And so if you make like any comment that people can like latch onto or attack you for, they will attack you full force, thousands of comments on why you're the dumbest person ever. And I think there's like a cultural piece too where like people feel drawn to respond to that with even more hate and like, nah, you don't know me and blah blah and like calling people out. I know y'all have been on Twitter and seen some like of the craziest quote retweets of all time of people just getting called out of their name or like they have like a family member who's dead in their bio and like they're like, oh yeah, well tell Derek how you feel later, I'll be talking to him. And it's just like, dang, dude, all he said was that he did not like Joker too. And now we're calling out his dead relative. So yeah, that's what that made me think of too.
Well, so if you're in an escalating situation, how do you get out of it?
Well, yeah, and I think that that's a good question because I think that's actually like where the trap comes from because, it's a little counterintuitive, and I think that is as well is cultural, uh, and I think it is, I think we feel this way because we do in a lot of ways live in a very competitive culture that says like you always have to win, you always have to defeat your opponent, But I think a lot of times the key to de-escalating, is just to step back from the competition, make it clear like look, I'm not trying to one up, I'm not going to try to one up you, Like if somebody starts talking loud, don't try to talk over them, move a little bit closer so you can maintain your volume, get up and leave, walk out, so that you don't have to fight to be heard, Um, yeah, I think it's like, it's and it looks different for every situation. There are whole classes and courses just about de-escalation, and like different tactics for doing that in different situations. But I think like the ultimate essence of it is just like to not give in to that instinct to, compete for whatever it is you're trying to get done, or whatever it is you're trying to communicate, which can be hard, especially if you are terrified of losing,
Mm.
So, or if that's something that you like, are just like, if that's a concept that you're attached to, yeah, but yeah.
Oh, and I'd also like to say that I don't know. I just find it so ridiculous that people even do that. You know what I mean? Like, I get it because I think that's how especially in America, I feel like our society, you know what I mean? Like, you want to you have more money. You know what I mean? You want to be more successful. If you're on social media, well, you want more followers. You know
Be
what I
top
mean? And
dog,
so,
yeah.
yeah, for me, I realized like as I got older, I'm like, I don't really care about any of that. Like, people be like, oh, yeah, like I got like, you know, even with like education, I'm like, yeah, I think that that's great, not to, poo poo people who have a degree, but I think like I've heard some people say, oh yeah, well I got all this, I'm doing all these things. I'm like, okay, well, are you a good person? I mean, are you healthy? Are you happy? Yeah. And so I think it's just, I don't know, like, or even like coming at somebody on social media. Like I remember I made a comment on TikTok. I was like, I really don't like Taylor Swift's music. And people were like, you're a misogynist. Well, you're just, you know what I mean? I'm like, I just because I don't enjoy her music, I wasn't hating on her. You know, I didn't say anything derogatory towards women, or anything specific about her in general. So I definitely think that kind of like, oh, well, if you're offended by somebody's opinion or you don't agree with it, that doesn't necessarily give you the right to attack them. I'm like, I've heard and seen some people say some crazy things. I'm like, okay. But I'm not gonna go out of my way to call them, you know what I mean? Like just to defame them, basically, I think is absolutely ridiculous. But I don't know. For me, I feel like I'm just not that serious of a person. Like I make jokes. I'm like, and people be like, "Oh my God, you shouldn't have said that." I'm like, I'm just, having fun, you know.
And I'll just add too, so there's those pieces, and then there's like real conflicts and patterns that we have in our families and in community too. So, for instance, I have two family members that recently had an incident that it really wasn't about what happened. There was a heightened stress at the moment, and their relationship is so that one is looking to be judged, so they're looking for confirmation, anticipating the conflict, and then from one person, and it just escalates and escalates until it just explodes, and then they have to be like, "Oh, I'm," like later come back and say they're sorry. But the idea that we are playing these same scripts and patterns that really are about the hurt that we've had in our relationships, and really the only way to step out of that is to change those patterns, to either forgive or to recognize them and try and move past them. And it's the same with armed conflict, and like one atrocity justifies other atrocities for revenge, justifies and it's just an escalating. And I mean, one example, however incomplete or imperfect, is the Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa after apartheid, to try to be less about, okay, what a, getting going after the criminals, but more about, okay, can we bring into our country's consciousness what happened and the truth about it. And again, how it led, where it led to ultimately, you could question whether there really was justice created and the system was changed. But that kind of, I think, is the spirit of, okay, how do we
The
de-escalate?
idea that they had the right idea, you know.
One more piece on escalation that you made me think about cadence was like one of the leverage points that we'll touch on here in a little bit is like the paradigms or like the beliefs that people have. And I think there is an underlying belief that more is better a lot of the time. Like we've been reading this book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And he and other entrepreneurial thinkers and thought leaders have been talking about they talk about like an undisciplined pursuit of more. So, a lot of people, we see our goals like, how can I get more money? How can I get more fame? How can I get more recognition? And I think that underlying, how do I get more? How do I create more? How do I do more? Also informs that pattern of escalating things. So like, how do we do more at any given time, even if more is not the solution to our problems. So I was like, oh well, if we do more, then surely it'll change for the better because we're doing more of the thing. We're doing more of it. So it's gotta be better.
Did we want to talk about shifting the burden to the intervener still? If
Well,
you
we
want
can
to,
if you
yeah.
want. So another pattern that what she calls system traps and opportunities, because these things exist in the world and we participated in them. The trap is if we don't recognize it and we continue to play into it. The opportunity is if you recognize it and do something that can help change the idea of making it so that it behaves better or more ideal for people who are part of the system. So this basic shape of this system is one example is addiction to substances or drugs. So if things are rough in your life and you don't feel like you have the agency to change it, you can change how you feel in the moment, which then can, over time, like it might help in the moment, but it wears out. And over the long run, addiction and becoming physically dependent, you need more and more in order to feel that same kind of high and elation.
Yeah.
Which leads people to like kind of like wreck their lives and their relationships in a lot of ways that that makes it harder for them to feel better because all those
Yeah.
reports are degraded by the substance, which helps cover up the symptoms of feeling bad in the moment. But over time, it degrades your ability to feel good. So
Another
it's kind of
another example that we already kind of talked about is caffeine addiction. Caffeine is a drug as well. But it's, this idea, we talked about that reinforcing feedback loop. You drink 1 cup of coffee one day, and the next day 1 cup isn't enough, so you drink two, and then the next day two isn't enough, so you drink three. So and so you just, you need more and more of this substance to make yourself feel a certain way, and it gets to the point where you can't feel energized unless you have this substance because your brain, like, stops being able to produce, whatever it is that, like, that caffeine is like triggering for you, when perhaps all you needed was to go to sleep, get 8 hours, and maybe you'll be fine. So I think, like, to the point that Alvin was making, it's like it is treating a symptom of a problem without treating the problem itself. Yeah.
another example I'll give is the movie Wall-E, Disney movie Wall-E, where humans make all this technology to take care of their every whim and robots, so much so that they don't know how to maintain it anymore. They don't know how, can't even walk anymore because they got these cots to float them around. Like, so that technology atrophies their ability to even know how to use it or even like know how to serve themselves and maintain their own lives.
We're watching that play out in real time, if you ask me. I always used to roll my eyes a little bit when my parents would be like, you need to learn how to do math in your head, but now I'm like, oh no, they were right. They were right.
Yeah, calculators.
Definitely. Definitely. So, how do you avert that?
Well, first, can anyone else want to add?
Yeah, I was gonna say I love that you mentioned the movie Wall-E, and then you were talking about like being able to actually like do things on your own without needing like technology or depending on some other source to do it for you. And I think it's just crazy because I've noticed like even in like medicine, like I don't think I've ever had like a doctor or a nurse come in with like a physical chart, like a paper of everything on there, like all, or even like medical assistants, like they'll come in, they'll like just press some random buttons. They're like, okay, your blood pressure is like 130 over, whatever. And so I definitely think like for me, I know I saw this TikTok and this lady, she was like, I don't want any like young people drawing my blood because she said like they're too young. So she feels like they wouldn't have like enough experience. Like everything is like online now. Like even when I was in college, like I was like one of few students who would actually like handwrite everything down. And I was saying, I was like, well, what if something happens to your computer? Like literally everything is in there. What if something happens to your phone? You don't have that. You know what I mean? Things are it's tangible, but it's really not because it's online. Exactly. Like for me with my paper copy, like actually I could pull this up, open up this book. And so I definitely think for me there's something nice about actually having that knowledge or intelligence without, you know, let me Google this. You know what I mean? And it is handy in some points, but I definitely think, we can definitely become too dependent on it. Um, Especially like for me, I think that the whole self-driving cars, in my opinion, is kind of insane. I'm not going to,
It's a slippery slope, I'll
yeah,
tell you that.
yeah,
Yeah, people can barely drive as it is.
yeah. And now we have robots driving for us. I'm like, no, I'm not leaving a computer, I mean, have my life in its hands. I'm like, what if something,
And especially
yeah,
because, like, a lot of people don't understand that, like, that machine still requires you to be alert, and
yes.
paying attention to correct it if it
Hmm.
does make a mistake.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, that was a perfect example. The healthcare one. So, or quote unquote healthcare industry, which is really focused on illness and injury and medicine and pharmacy. So so doctors don't take, at least in the past, they're like nutrition is not a big emphasis of medicine and doctors. It's more about, okay, diagnosis and then producing drugs to cover up the symptoms of high blood pressure, which is really about what people are eating, their
Yeah,
diet,
yeah, I was
how
saying
much
nobody's
physical
looking at the
activity people are
McDonald's on
getting.
every corner as a healthcare
And if you're looking at
plan.
America's healthcare costs as being way higher than everywhere else in the world, that's where you look because we shifted the burden so much that our populations and communities have atrophied because of what we eat and our habits and behaviors. And that's the way out is what they talk about is really strengthening the system to be healthy by itself. So it says shifting the burden to the intervener. So the intervener in that example is the healthcare industry, the doctors, the pharmacists who prescribe the medicine to keep people alive while still having a poor lifestyle, diet, exercise, etc.
Yeah, and I
Exactly.
mean
Yeah.
it makes me think of that adage, you teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime rather than if you fish for somebody then they
Yeah.
only eat for the day.
Yeah.
And it also made me think of, a lot of the work that we do at Kepra is like how do we build leadership in others, and how do we steward agency within other people and like give them or not necessarily give them, but um show them and support them to reaching their fullest potential and being able to make decisions for themselves. And I think shifting the burden to the intervener is such like a um it's such an interesting line to walk there because a lot of the time, as a manager and as a mentor, I have a bad habit of like stepping in to help somebody. If like we have a young person who's like missing a lot of deadlines and like isn't turning in certain work, like I have a propensity to be like, okay, I'll take that on, or like I'll help you and I'll like figure it out and I'll step in when that might be a good short-term solution. It's not. But long term, I'm um not allowing that person to get maybe they don't have the right training. Maybe we just haven't walked through what tools they can use to be able to reach to that place and get to that place. So instead of addressing the root problem, this person doesn't know how to do it. I'm instead stepping in with my own solution, saying like, "Oh, I can figure it out. I can get it done," and not actually addressing the root of my issue, which is often not that these things aren't being done. It's that the person I'm stewarding or mentoring doesn't have what they need to be able to get it done, which are often two very different things. So,
Or they just have a JRU, so why do they need to get it done?
yeah, exactly. Or they're just like, well, I can just act like a dumbass and Jay will step in for me, no problem. This is a perfect system. I got it. It's all good.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about maybe that not necessarily danger. Well, I guess you can kind of say kind of danger of like
Can be
someone,
dangerous.
realizing like, I could kind of slack off and then I'll have, this person there to, you know what I mean? Like come in and like take me under their wing and be like, okay, this is what we're going to do, instead of, maybe like having a talk with them, like if you truly want to be successful or, maybe get everything that you want to get out of this position or wherever you're at. If you're in school, you have to put in the work. Like I can kind of guide you for a bit, but people aren't always going to be there for you to what I mean, to check up on you to make sure that you're getting everything turned in on time or you're fulfilling all the duties that you have to fulfill. And so I think like you said, just make sure that they already have those tools to be able to do that on their own rather than constantly depending on somebody else to do it for them. Yeah.
Like say the same thing. Like yeah, I'm thinking you could say the same thing about like parents too,
Mm-hmm.
and their children, and like do they raise them with like some level of go out there and do what you will and learn your lessons and be independent and I'll be back here waiting on you when you inevitably scrape your knee, or are they like constantly helicopter parenting over them to the point where like once the child gets out on their own and it's time for them to make decisions, they're looking for their parents to come help them and tell them what to do and they're not there, and now they're in an extra rough spot because they never got that training to be ready for that
Mm-hmm.
next stage in their life.
And I would say I think sometimes people need a little push. Like in my opinion, like I think let's say even if you drop your, I don't know, 12-year-old kid off at the mall with some friends, be like, okay, let's say it's 4:30. I'll be back here at 8, right? You got a phone, you know what I mean? If you need something, you can call me, but maybe more so giving them that kind of um what's the word for that? Experience or maybe opportunity to maybe learn on their own, maybe more so how to be safe. Okay, you're there with, three other friends, maybe, oh, one of your friends has to use the bathroom. Okay, send another girl with her. You know what I mean? Just to learn things like, oh, practicing safety. We're all staying together. And so I think also I think it's important to push people a little bit, let them kind of like explore things on their own and see if they can figure it out for themselves.
I think what that makes me think about, and then maybe we could also use this as a segue into the next section of the
Hmm.
discussion today, which is about leverage points. But I think Alvin mentioned paradigms earlier, and what I think that you're talking about is like shifting someone's paradigm from one of like dependence and like, I need this other person or this other entity or this other thing to help me be okay and keeping me safe to one of independence, which basically says like, I have the tools to do that myself, so like back to the healthcare example, like to bring that out to scale, like it would be a paradigm shit like the dependence is one that says like I can do whatever I want to my body for however long that I want because the healthcare system will always be there to fix the damage, it won't. And then like shifting the paradigm shift to independence is like getting to a point of being like, well, yes, medicine will be an option, surgery will be an option, but those are options that come at a cost, and I can avoid those costs if I take responsibility myself on the front end to keep myself healthy, to keep myself safe, you know. Yeah, but we did want to talk about some of like in this book, Systems Thinking, a primer by Donella Meadows. You should read it. She talks about 12 leverage points. It's a lot. And basically what these are levels in a system, the mechanisms in a system, I guess is another way that you could look at it, that will, when you change them or when you tweak them, will allow you to change ultimately how that system behaves. And, some of them we've already talked about. We've talked about balancing and reinforcing feedback loops are leverage points. Changing a balancing or reinforcing feedback loop changes how the system works. So an example of that, if you have a balancing loop in your, you know, back to the refrigerator thing. If you don't have a balancing loop that says that when the level of leftovers in the refrigerator reaches this level, we stop using it, then eventually the refrigerator system collapses and you don't have a fridge anymore. But if you change that to have a balancing loop that says like, okay, at this level we stop filling the fridge, then you get a different result. So, those are that's an example of a leverage point. We talked about stocks and flow structures, lower level, because uh there's only so a refrigerator holds food. There's only so much you can do to tweak that. Uh, you know,
What if we bought 4 refrigerators? Do
well,
we just buy a new one when we fill up the other one?
you could do that. You could increase the capacity of your stock, but if you don't if you don't, higher leverage point, if you don't have a balancing loop or something like that, or, and we'll get into the leverage points higher than that in a second, eventually you'll just have 4 totally full broken refrigerators.
We just buy another one.
And then you'll have 5. And then you'll have even more leftovers to fill your dumpster with. So, but yeah, so, numbers, buffers, stock and flow structures, delays, bound feedback loops. Those are all considered low leverage points. You can change those and they may affect some things, but they're not really where you want to go if you want to see the most change in the system. So, Yeah. Well, I think we actually had talked about you starting it off, Alvin, with rules. So if you
Oh,
want to talk
sure.
about
So,
rules as a leverage
I think
point.
one example with rules, we talked about that fishing example earlier, where, okay, if you fish to the point where you wipe out, you pass the critical threshold where they can no longer reproduce and rebound, that last 20% of the fish, if people use sonar and drag nets to fish those, then it collapses totally. So you could have a rule or a regulation where you say, okay, these technologies are illegal, and anyone caught is going to be arrested and face fines or penalties or jail. Another could be quotas. Okay, every fisher, we're going to have you register, and everyone has a quota so that we can manage the fish population. So it's a leverage point, but again, there's ways around it because people could do it illegally or secretly because they are still motivated to catch more fish and make profit.
They could get the rules changed as well,
That's
you
true.
know?
Depends on
Yeah.
who controls the rules too. So, but rules is a leverage point that can have significant impact. If people follow the rules, it might have a big difference compared to having no rules.
So, going back to our earlier example, the rule would be you cannot fill the fridge until the point where it blocks the vents and prevents the air from
Yeah,
circulating.
or the rule would be, okay, everyone's gonna have a fridge clean out night. But again, tragedy of the commons. If
What if we
people don't
forget?
actually do
Yeah,
it, well,
exactly. And then I think the next one on the list, self-organization was you, J.
Yeah, so self-organization is just our ability to be out here in the world and respond to what's happening with our decision making. So, what do I mean by that? You could say like, "Oh man, we're recognizing that we just got so many people who are trying to get to work. And a lot of us are using up a lot of gas or we're expending a lot of CO2 into the air because we're all trying to get to work. There's like 10 of us. We're like, oh, well, my car fits 5 people, so maybe we could just take 2 cars and save on gas and everybody just pitches in. And, so that is an example of how people can self-organize in a system to do something differently or adapt their process or what they're doing. And like at Kepra, we have a system for making sure that we are always self-organizing that we call Sarah, which is strategize, execute, review, and adapt. So after pretty much anything that we do collectively or cooperatively, we always come back afterward and just like, what the fuck was that? What just happened? Did it go well? Did it go poorly? What can we do differently to make it go better based on what we think is best? And that is like caked into literally everything that we do. Like after every mumbo jumbo, we all sit together afterward and talk about what went well, what did it, what can we do better next time. And that's an example of how things self-organize. Where you can also think of, um, like evolution in animals. So in different places, even if you're on like the same island, one bird might evolve into several different. It might evolve to have different structures, like a longer beak so that way it can access fruits in this particular part of the island. So over time, it's able to revise and adapt and adjust its strategy based on what it has and do things differently next time.
I think another good example, especially of like self-organization in like a human setting, especially like at a scale that had like a major impact on a larger system, because I think like something that she is mentioned in the book that is like important to understand about self-organization is that it is uh a point of resilience, Basically, the more ability to self-organize that you have within your system, the more resilient, the more sustainable your system is going to be, the longer it'll last, the more effective it'll be. And so the example that I think about is the Montgomery bus boycotts, a lot of black communities came together to say like, hey, we're not using these buses. They're racist, they're segregated, and we're going to show them how heavily they are affected when they don't have our business. but folks still got to get to work somehow, you know? And so what happened is those communities self-organized other ways for people to get to work. Like Jay Rue was talking, they organized carpools, you know, they organized cab fare, you know. Certain cab companies would let black riders ride for free, you know, in support and solidarity of that movement. And like through that, nobody passed down orders necessarily for them to do that, at least not in all cases, you know. Maybe there were, but that is an example of self-organization, just that especially, and our bodies are self-organizing systems, like there's like a lot of like medical stories of like somebody losing like half of their brain, and over time the remaining half is able to like compensate and perform the remaining like bodily functions, but I think that like human beings especially, we're very creative, we're very adaptable. We lean on each other for like knowledge and inspiration. And so because of that, we have a lot of capacity for self-organization as well. And that's just something that you see in human systems a lot. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say like, yeah, you can see it all over in humans. I mean, just like culture. We were talking to Cadence about like music earlier. You know, you can see the different genres of music as different forms of self-organization. What do we think is important about music? What do we want to see in our music? And then how do we move to create music that has those different pieces? You know, I really like electric guitar. How do I build that into more of my music? I really like distortion in my electric guitar. How do I build that into my music? And because I have the power to make decisions over those kinds of things, I can then, I have agency. I can self-organize. I can do what I want to do. And one thing I did want to point out from the book too that I thought was really powerful when it comes to self-organization, really celebrating difference and diversity. Diversity is a big ass buzzword right now. And then, it's often just used as like a signal of, oh yeah, we got a black person on our college pamphlet. Like, aren't we just so great? Don't we just have so many diverse perspectives? But diversity also, while it does work along racial lines, it also works along like age lines, gender lines, like what people think is important, like what people value, people's passions and people's dreams, people's skill sets, and what people bring to the table. These different places where we are different, there are so many opportunities in that because just to what Shin was speaking to, those skill sets and those bases of knowledge give us more avenues to make decisions and give us more places to go if we reach a brick wall, which just continues to build the resilience of what we can do. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, that's why human beings are so powerful. That's why we have been able to take over the planet, is because we are able to be like, okay, what do we want to do? Let's work together and adapt our strategies, make new technologies, make new advancements to keep pushing towards that. And because people were doing it in different places, we were able to do that a lot of different ways.
With, with that last example in mind of like humans and where we are, in terms of our spread across the planet, explain goals, as a higher leverage point and how, you know, ultimately current human goals have, you know,
Well, I think in a lot of ways, like Chin said earlier, a lot of these leverage points are just kind of like building blocks to the next one and the next one. So, your goal often has a lot of features, or it can be seen in other pieces like rules. So, like for a corporation like Disney, their goal is to make Disney the first thing you think of when you think of a cartoon or like an animated film. And then what do they have to do? What rules do they have to set? Maybe one of those rules is making hell a lot of money so that way they can buy all the other entertainment businesses like 20th Century Fox. But they got to do what they got to do to reach that number one goal of being the number one animated company or whatever animation studio that exists in the popular zeitgeist. Yes, sir. Nas has something to add in here. Okay, he about to come through.
I had a question. How important do you think it is to identify what the goal of a system is to understand the components of it?
Sure. Well, yeah, and one of the first things we talked about in the first session was like the three parts of any system, which are the elements. If you're looking like at a game, like football. That would be like the football players. So you got elements, you got the interconnections, which are things like the rules, the stocks of, or I mean the rules or the flows of information, maybe the delays that arise. But then the third piece of any system is the goal. What are you trying to do? What is the purpose of this? And that being like one of the easiest ways to identify a system of like, okay, well, even going back to like the coffee example, my goal is to um increase my energy day to day, and coffee might just be like a part of that, or that informs why I'm drinking coffee is because I want to have more energy. I see Chin.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I like the football example because, like, the goal in the football game is to determine a winner and a loser, you know? And so all of the rules, all of the self-organized strategies that the teams put together, all of the mechanisms of play are subservient to that goal of picking a winner or a loser, which is why, as long as that is the goal, you know, you're not gonna have a football game. Maybe you'll get a tie, but then you go into overtime. And then if that gets a tie, you go into double overtime, So, it's just there are only two leverage points higher than goals, which we'll get to in a second. But just to answer your question now, I think that a lot of the time you'll find that like the goal of the system really does determine how uh, you know, the goal of the system determines how everything else in the system functions and works together. And the only thing that's more crucial that is how you set your goal in the first place. But then that gets into paradigms, which is the next level up.
Yeah, and I'll just add on the goal piece. There's a really good example that I think Danella Meadows puts in the book, which is around kind of how we see the health of our economies. We evaluate it based on gross domestic or gross national product, which is how much stuff are you producing and consuming. Whereas we could have a different goal that we're measuring, which is, okay, what are people's health levels? What are people's education levels? What are people's level of happiness and or mental health issues? There's a whole number of ways that we could measure the health of an economy that are not based off that one number, because that one number, if you build like have a factory that produces stuff that breaks after 1 year and you just keep churning them out, that increases that increases the gross national product. That number goes up, even if it's wasteful. Or okay, if you build a light bulb that lasts 10 years instead of just 3 months, that makes your gross national product go down. So you're going to be incentivized not to build stuff that lasts longer. It's just the amount of stuff that you're consuming and putting through the economy, which also is not necessarily related to how happy people are, because it's just the goal is different.
That's
The
just the
goal is
goal we set
profit.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. But if we had a different goal and we're measuring different things, that might significantly change some of the policies and how it works.
Yeah, it made me think of another example that she brought in the book, which was Ronald Reagan's famous "Ask not what you can do," I mean, not ask not what the government can do for you, but what you can do for your government, and how that goal of like what you can do for the government and not what the government can do for you completely reshaped people's frame and paradigm. Maybe that's a good segue into the next section. But it just completely reframed how people thought about the purpose of government as an institution that helps provide these safety nets, like making sure people have food, making sure people have education, making sure the roads and the infrastructure are all together and looking right. All these various pieces that, communities thought were important to uphold and that every person should have access to. From that to more of this, okay, you're out here on your own, provide for yourself. Don't look at the government. The government ain't gonna save you, and getting more into into that, right? We need your money
Well,
to do all these
and
other
I'll
things.
say he also takes it a step further, which is get the government off my back. We don't need a government or a big government that regulates. Then we need more free market capitalism, less regulation. That'll open it up for more investment and more prosperity. And again, if you look at these systems traps, you'll realize, oh, like intervention can be unhealthy. There are ways to unhealthily intervene, but left unchecked, particularly with success to the successful, which is the biggest, probably the biggest system trap that we have running on a global scale, is the idea that people have capital and cash, make the money. You don't even need to do anything. Money makes money. That's like how the economy works. Like, and that kind of leads to paradigms, which kind of you can change the laws, but if people, and I think there's a quote in there, if the thinking that created a factory, okay, we got a factory here, but we tear it down because that's not the kind of community we want. We want to have a different kind of economy. But if the thinking that created that factory still exists, the way that we think about it, it will be rebuilt. That it's really like some very fundamental unspoken values in the way that we see the world that really shape all these other things. Our goals, they shape our rules we create, they shape just our individual behavior. So some paradigm examples are that people can own land. That is a paradigm. Not all societies believe that people can own land. And think about the economy and the housing crisis. If the paradigm, people didn't believe that paradigm. And again, it's more complicated than that because that paradigm is locked up and connected to other ones, which are about, oh, people should have the right to accumulate for whatever work that they do and have a business. There should be no checks on personal property. And that is a paradigm that we have people who are hundreds, have hundreds of billions of dollars, whereas the larger part of the global population has no wealth or possibly negative wealth. So that is a paradigm that we have a society where we see that as just and fair and just the way that the world is. That's not necessarily what everyone's paradigm is, and it doesn't have to be the paradigm forever or the future either. So really like, and that there was a really, and we watched. I don't know if we watched a video. I don't know if we've watched this video. There's like a philosopher, Ingrid, who wrote a book on limitarianism, which is the idea that if we're going to really solve the inequality in our society, we can't just look at lifting up people out of poverty. We have to look at those who have accumulated massive amounts of wealth and take it from the top and create a greater, if there's going to be equality across society, it really has to start from the top, not from empowering folks who have less. Because if like and she proposes one way to start, again, not a comprehensive solution. What if people couldn't own more than $10 million across the globe? Again, it would take some massive paradigm shifts, otherwise the system will resist and not is not going to happen. But just thinking about that one paradigm shift, that no one should have more than $10 million, imagine what that does to the stock market. Who owns companies? Who owns properties? Just kind of the change to the whole system that would create.
Excuse me. I really like that you brought that up, kind of this idea of instead of like maybe trying to empower everybody at the bottom, what I mean? Let's look at, the people who have billions of dollars, you know what I mean, and what they're doing and how we can kind of loop them to, you know what I mean? I do think that people should have the right to, compete for wealth, but I think it's also insane that we have people like Kanye West who's constantly trying to make, new businesses. He's a billionaire, and there's people who are barely, getting by. There's people that are homeless, and so it's ridiculous. And I think how we are talking about that, you know what I mean, that more is better. You know what I mean? If I got more money than you, if I have, you know what I mean, people who have, I saw this video, this celebrity, he had like 7 cars. I'm like, what do you need 7 cars for? You don't even drive them all. He was like, oh, well, I like to drive this one mainly. 6 other people can have those cars, and so it's just ridiculous that like I don't know. I think it's just so greedy. Like Americans are like that's the thing. You know what I mean? Especially people at the top, they're just filled with greed. They don't necessarily need all of these things. They just want it. You know what I mean? They feel like, oh, if I have more status, more money, more power, so it's just I don't know. It's ridiculous. I do like the idea of people being able to, oh yeah, maybe compete for money or want to try to make more money because I think that that's a good thing. But I think also we need to be more realistic. You know what I mean? Like it's just I don't know. And I like how you said, okay, well, let's cap it right here. Like, let's say we could say, yeah, the limits, the highest amount of money that people can make in America. Let's say if they cap it at 30 million, right? Nobody can make more money than that. And figuring out like, well, what can we do to get there? You know what I mean? And so I think it's just all about, you know, making it more fair and honestly more realistic. Cause I'm like, yeah, that's all I had to say. Hmm.
Yeah, and I was just gonna talk about, that paradigm too, where, even like environmentally, I know like one of the ones that was on me for a long time as a little kid is like I don't think we're really trained to think about the fact that things run out eventually. And, like, oh man, the planet is so big, the universe is so big. And there's like this underlying assumption or like paradigm that the resources that are out there in the world will just last forever and we don't have to worry about it at all. And that, the things that exist now will just continue on no matter what, is one of the most crippling paradigms that we have as a society right now. Because it's just like, oh, screw it, let's get the forests, cut down, get those trees into the mill so we can get this paper, literally and metaphorically.
I also think that and we talked about this a little bit earlier when we were talking about just this idea of like the when we were talking about the tragedy of the commons and how you can like there are cultural solutions to making it more intuitive that people take care of their shared resources. And I think that's what I was talking about when I said that, like, sometimes those cultural solutions can be very slow because, as high leverage as a paradigm is, the challenge is just that, like, it takes a long time to get one person to change their fundamental assumptions and beliefs about the world. It takes like so much more time and resources to do that at a societal level, and you almost need like multiple levels of multiple different institutions like doing that at the same time. You need like you need some of that in the schools, you need some of that in people's workplaces, you need some of that in like the art and the media that people consume. um which is just what I think like it's just important to remember that like shifting paradigms really does take like a multi-pronged, multifaceted approach. And I did also want to get into like the highest level leverage point that Donella Meadows lists in the book, which is also kind of a paradigm in and of itself. And I think it's one that uh is really is really like the common paradigm in like our organizational space and like our community. And I'll say explain a little bit more about what I mean about that as well. But what I'm talking about now is transcending paradigms. And that is the understanding that there is no one paradigm that is always correct in all instances, because as detrimental, as ruinous, as cancerous as the paradigm of like some big words as the paradigm of like infinite growth has been for like the world, there are some situations, like maybe you have like a growing community, and your community isn't currently producing enough food to feed everybody in it,
We got the lights on in here. Thanks to
exactly.
capitalism.
So like sometimes you do need like, sometimes a growth paradigm does work, but at the same time, you also have to be able to understand when that paradigm doesn't work and then identify a new paradigm that's more appropriate under your current circumstances, and I think that like that is the key to adaptability. I think that like, it's lower as a leverage point, but I also think that that's one of like I don't think that self-organization could work unless there were multiple different paradigms present, all sort of like, you know, existing at the same level until one rises to the surface is like more useful or more applicable in a specific situation than another. Um, and just like talking a little bit about like the Kepler space, there is our organizational paradigm is made up of the paradigms of whoever is in the room at the moment, So how we don't have I'm not looking at a list of rules for how to run mumbo jumbo that was passed down to us by our founders that we take as gospel. We got in here today and decided based on who's here, how we were going to run this, and that's led to a really like good feeling conversation, I feel like. So, and like to J. Rue's point, we have systems to make sure that we are always self-organizing, because like our paradigm is one fundamentally of adaptability, of transformation, of change, of understanding that what works in one situation ain't always going to work in another situation, and so you have to be able to change your plan up based on what the moment calls for. So yeah, if I would love to hear if anybody, has any more thoughts on that, on transcending paradigms or how Kepler transcends paradigms, how we can transcend paradigms.
Yeah. When it comes to transcending paradigms, I think one of the biggest pieces for that is um just being free and allowing yourself to be free and also allowing yourself to deal with the consequences of being free as well. Because it's definitely not easy. I think when we consider the word freedom, it's often like, oh, I have the freedom to like be lazy and do whatever I want when that's not always what freedom looks like. Um, I think for me, freedom is more about not being constrained by boxes and being willing to not allow yourself to be in a box at any given time. Now, boxes are helpful. Sometimes you can use a box to make a decision, and we're always putting things in boxes as human beings just to organize and understand the world around us. But the biggest thing is to not be confined by it, not be bound by it forever and ever, because inevitably there will come a time where it just doesn't work anymore. Yeah, you got to
How
think
would
outside.
you connect the idea of freedom with responsibility for your thoughts and actions
Dang, man. How would I connect freedom and my responsibility for my actions
and thinking?
and thinking? Asking the big questions now. Um, I would say with being able to be free, how it manifests in my thoughts and actions is, I think going back to some of the other pieces we were talking about, just being around other people who are different from me, and finding other people who also want to be free and have the ability to like make choices over how they want to live their lives. And it's uh it's difficult because at the same time I think freedom looks different for everybody. Like even people within Kepra, I think there's a difference in what people imagine being free to be like. Um, but yeah, for me, I think it's really just about how can I make the best choices for myself and for others, understanding that there is an interdependence, and there are interconnections between all people, and that in order for me to live my best life, other people are going to have to live their best lives too. And because of that, I have a responsibility, um, not only I have a responsibility to others to take care of myself so that way I can properly show up for others. And I have a responsibility to take care of others to make sure that they can take care of me and help me take care of me and help me take care of them too. So I would say that that interconnectedness between people and like that interdependence that we often talk about is really at the core of that responsibility. Like I can't do it without you, and you can't do it without me, and all these other systems. Like you said, we wouldn't have these wonderful lights showing if not for our fantastic AES lights and electricity company doing their best work.
And like, because like along those lines, like, we have the freedom, of course, to not pay our light bill. That is something that we are free to choose to do, but then we don't get to do this, and we have to understand that consequence and weigh those options. So I think, like, to me, freedom is the understanding basically just that you always have a choice, and even if sometimes, like, the choice is between something that is like, you know, maybe not ideal, but the only other option is something that's totally unacceptable, that's still a choice, and I think that like responsibility comes into it, because, you know, uh, you know, responsibility comes into it because like, you can't, you know, no one can choose how you act or respond to something but you. And so if uh if that's all that you have control over, then you gotta make it count, you know? And if the only thing that you can control is how you respond, then you have to make sure that like you respond in a way that is in line with like where you're trying to go and what you're trying to get to. But nobody can choose that for you. And freedom is basically understanding that responsibility to of how you respond and act is always on you. Um, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, uh, no, I think just to piggyback off what you said about the freedom of responsibility, but you also have choices. You know what I mean? I like how you kind of mentioned like, okay, well, they have the freedom to not pay the light. You know what I mean? But then we won't have any electricity. You know what I mean? We won't have any lights. It'll be dark.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the freedom to not go to work, but then you can't be surprised why
You don't get when that paycheck don't
your
come
apartment,
through. Yeah.
or you don't have any money to do anything, or you can have the freedom to, not want to talk to somebody no more, but then you can't be upset when your relationship isn't flourishing. So I think it's just realizing that you have a choice. And I think that's what freedom is, like you said, to not be constrained or restricted. And yeah, I think I just really like what you said, but I think also I really like the boxes. You know what I mean? Because I think that's like an organizational tool. You know what I mean? Oh, this is this group of people. This is people with, let's say diabetes. You know what I mean? This is women. This is, men, whatever. This is white people, black people. But then there's also those little kind of like intricacies. This is whatever. So I definitely think also learning not to necessarily like those can be helpful, you know what I mean? Because you could find people similar to you who have, similar identity or maybe, whatever. But not necessarily keeping yourself in that box. Because I definitely think that can be a harmful thing because you can also connect with somebody who could be from a different box than you know what I mean? Or it's something like that, knowing that, you're kind of like a person who's made up of all different kinds of things. Well, I'm not just this, I'm not just that. Like, I'm also me. You know what I mean? I'm a human. And so, I don't know. I think I just really liked what you guys had to say. That was really cool.
Yeah, we are just super multifaceted. And there is no like one, even in like you said, even in those like categories and in those boxes, there's so many different permutations and ways that people have self-organized within that. And there's all kinds of subcultures in anything. You might have rock music, but then you got heavy metal, then you got funk, then you got jazz, all kind of in using those similar instruments but arranged and played different ways. And one other piece that I wanted to say on the freedom piece too was, we've been reading this book called Essentialism, and he talks about the power and the necessity of choice, and how even in instances where you might not be making a choice consciously, you are still making a choice. So like for example, for me, I went to school I went to college mostly just because my parents wanted me to, and because my grandmother, there was a lot of pressure from her, like, we want to see you graduate and blah, blah, blah. And, I, for a long time, was like, this isn't what I want to do. I don't want to go to school to be a computer scientist, but I was still in school to be one. So even if that wasn't the conscious choice I was making, that was still the choice I was making in that moment. That was still the paradigm that I was being tied to. And I think that's one of the biggest steps to rewriting paradigms is just having an awareness of the choices that you're making and why you're making those choices. So, why do you do the things that you do? And like think long and hard about what you value and like why you value it, and like what's at the heart and the core and the root of that particular thing. Like, do I value big muscles or do I value just like fitness and wanting to live a healthy lifestyle so that way I'm not hurting anywhere when I'm 80 years old? You know what I mean? What's really at the core of like why I'm trying to do what I'm doing?
Oh, yeah, I think also I like how you mentioned, you know what I mean? You, even though you were like, you know, not really like aware of like the choice you're making, you're still making that choice. You know what I mean? I'm sure you were like aware, but you didn't realize that. Like, is this really what I want to do, or is this, am I doing, what I think I should be doing? You know what I mean? Rather than what really drives me, what really motivates me, what makes me happy. And I definitely think it is hard, especially when you're a lot younger, because coming out of high school, you're like, okay, you're kind of obsequious, like you want to please your parents and uh, you know, just or even like you said, like your grandmother, oh, we want to see you graduate. I'm like, that's great, you know what I mean? But maybe that may not be the path for me. Like just because this is other people have an idea of what you should be or how you should be, like that doesn't mean that you have to fulfill those needs. You know what I mean? Like just and you are choosing to do that. Like if you go along with that, like, oh, we want you to go to college, and you choose to go to college even though you really want to, I don't know, be a cosmetologist. You're actively choosing to do something that is not going to make you happy. But I think also it is kind of, finding that balance of like, well, how can I, truly make choices for myself, and necessarily realizing that, I don't need that outside influence, you know what I mean? More so focusing that your choices are your own, even if this person thinks you should be doing something, you're still choosing to do what they say, you know, it's not you, it's yeah. I think that's just all.
I think the only thing that I was going to add is just that, you know, it's something that you really have to be intentional about. It's something that you have to like really set as a goal. And I think to tie this a little bit back to the systems thinking conversation and also back to this, piece about, just how systems thinking like exists in the Kepra cultural space. Freedom is out, like I think Jay Rue mentioned this, but like to be free and to like maintain freedom is Kepra's main goal, and so uh everything else that we do is really like driven by that and driven towards that, and then not just at like the organizational level, but it's also like, imbued into us as individuals as well. That like that goal is one that we're encouraged to take on for ourselves, in our like individual conquest too.
And
Uh,
I'll just add in that manifests itself when you say, "Hey, I think we should do this," or "I think this." Why do you think that? And just know, like, oh, this other person said it. Oh, like, wow. Well, what? That's not good enough. Like,
I think like understanding your current paradigm and then alternative paradigms is like the first step to being able to change
yeah. And have you
paradigms.
considered the complete opposite? What's the downside of this way of action? What are all the other options that we could be thinking about too? And I also have to drop for those who are Miyazaki fans, the film Princess Mononoke, the young man hero who journeys into a strange land. They say that he has come to the place and he comes into a conflict. I don't know spoilers, but a conflict really between nature and humans, the natural world and humans. And at one point in the movie, they say that he has come to with eyes unclouded by hate. That as someone outside of this conflict, he has come to be able to observe it and see all the different perspectives and sides. And just that's kind of the what we can cultivate, not having any one ideology, socialism, Marxism, capitalism, to tell us exactly what we should think or believe, but to see the world as it is, to understand that our own perspectives are highly limited, our experiences are very limited, and to just kind of that humility of um, both, seeking to understand and seeking a path that um, resonates as true or meaningful, but not to be wedded to our own perspectives ever.
One more thing that I did want to add, and I don't know if there's really a clean way to segue into this, but I am just going to put it out there because I think it's important. But I think that, we've talked about resilience tonight and just like that as like, one, resilience should always be a goal, like you should always want your system to be resilient until it meets its goal, if it's a goal that can be met, like I would say, like in our case, the goal of being free, that's not really something that we ever accomplish. It's just something that we always aspire to. But, res but, in that,
to be resilient. I was just saying I'm firing back on that particular
Germs
paradigm.
are a deeply important part of our own body.
But yeah, so I would say resilience is not a function we always want. At least I don't always want like germs to
They
be
are our
resilient.
ancestors.
I guess you got a
Honor
point
your
there.
ancestors, Jake.
No, that's a paradigm. I refuse to accept it.
obviously, we don't want our enemies to be resilient, if you consider germs your enemy, but
Maybe we do.
But I think what I just wanted to say was that is resilience is something that you have to uh actively manage, and actively organize for, and I think that everything that we've talked about today, from, choosing the right paradigm to choosing the right goals to, self-organization and creating rules and not falling into these systems traps and feed, all of that can help you manage and maintain resilience and organize towards resilience, but I think that for me, the most important part of resilience is adaptability, and I think that if you take anything away from all the conversation that we've had over the past 2 hours, it's just, remain adaptable, remain flexible, and like develop your ability to read your environment and make decisions based off of those observations. I think a quote that Alvin's been throwing around a lot, a really good one, I'll say, is less preparation, more presence. And I think that the way that I interpret that is like, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. You can predict as many possible scenarios as you want. You can plan as many responses to those scenarios as you want, but there will always be a limit to your imagination. There will always be a limit to the possible futures that you can see. And so the only way to be ready for whatever comes is to accept that, you might not be ready. You just have to react the best you can with the best information you've got when it's time to go. So expect the
Jay, punch him in
unexpected.
the face. Get ready, go.
Yeah. Was there anything else we wanted
That's a
to?
great way to close it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, thank you everybody on our facilitation
Thank you to
team.
our very special
Thank you to
guest,
our very
Cadence.
special guest, Cadence. Woo! Clap
And
for
to the tech
Cadence. Clap for
team,
Cadence.
Nazir, Naz on the tech.
Thanks for Nas on tech.
Yeah.
Thank you to the Indianapolis Recorder for allowing us to stream all of these mumbo jumbo conversations to their Facebook platform. And finally, if you enjoyed the conversation that you just watched or listened to, if you want to support our ability to do more stuff like this, please visit donate.kepler.org and leave a generous donation. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, great work, y'all. Thanks.
Yeah, you too.
Have a good night, everybody.
You also got to stop it on YouTube.
Yeah, you gotta stop the live.
You do it.
Still here.
The screen.
Cut it. Cut it.
It's at the top, where it says YouTube.